Shit. Ah! Hey guys, it's Casey, and today I've got for you a book haul. So my birthday was in the beginning of this month, so I have quite a few books to haul that were gifted to me from friends and family, and then there are a couple in this haul that I got myself. Lately I've been really excited to try out more adult fantasy series as I love fantasy, and I've read a fair amount of young adult fantasy before, but I'm really excited to try out a lot of the exciting new authors and series that I've heard about. So actually I think all of this, so this entire haul is going to be adult fantasy. And the first book I have is Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. As you can see, I have already actually started this one. We're just not going to worry about that. Elantris is Brandon Sanderson's first novel, and Brandon Sanderson is an author that, if you want to get into adult fantasy, is definitely the place that everyone recommends that you start, or definitely something that you should read. Brandon Sanderson has a writing style that is said to be very accessible, while still having these very complicated, epic, high fantasy plots. And it's often cited as like a good transition between young adult and adult fantasy, so I thought I'd give Brandon Sanderson a go. This book is about the city of Elantris, which used to be filled with individuals with magical powers that made them essentially demigods. The magical powers were distributed randomly across the population. People would sort of wake up one day having realized that they've been gifted with these magical powers, and then they would go into the city of Elantris. About 10 years ago, something happened to corrupt that power that's kind of like a plague on the people of Elantris. They become sort of almost like this walking dead, so they lose kind of the ability to heal, but they also don't ever die. And so these people are considered basically afflicted, and when someone in the population shows that they have sort of made this transition, they are then just kind of shoved into the ruins of Elantris. In the shadow of the fallen Elantris, there is now a city that has sprung up, and that is where the book is set. I mostly know what I've gathered from the first 110 pages that I've read so far, but I'm really excited, and so far this is a little more slow moving than I expected, but again, it's only the first 100 pages, so that's likely to change. But even though it's slow moving, I'm very, very intrigued by all of the different perspectives so far seem interesting, and I'm very interested in sort of unraveling the mystery of Elantris and how these political things are going to go. Continuing on the Brandon Sanderson train, the next thing I got this month was the Mistborn trilogy, which includes The Final Empire, The Well of Ascension, and The Hero of Ages. Can we just talk about these covers for a minute? I'm so excited. Look at them. They're beautiful and I love them. So arguably one of Brandon Sanderson's most beloved trilogies, and a place many people recommend you start, even though I'm starting with Elantris, is the Mistborn trilogy, the first one being The Final Empire. I know that this one follows a world in which magic is based on, I think, the consumption of metals, and individuals can consume specific metals and then use them sort of in their magical powers and control those metals. However, if you are able to control all of the different types of metals, you are what is considered a Mistborn. And I know that this is set in a world where the premise is, what if the Dark Lord won? So the Chosen One failed and the Dark Lord has now sort of taken over this kingdom. I believe this follows a girl as she joins up with a group of criminals and thieves, and I believe this ends up being a heist story and potentially one to take down the Dark Lord. I'm very excited. I have heard nothing but good things about this series, and I'm very, very much looking forward to reading it. This is so high on my TBR. Expect this in either July's wrap-up or August wrap-up, because I cannot wait to get to this. Look at them. They're so pretty. Ugh. Before I move on to the next few books in this haul, I want to mention that both the Mistborn trilogy and Elantris are part of Brandon Sanderson's greater universe known as the Cosmere. So the Cosmere is something that I very much want to get into, and I'm very excited to read a lot of the books in. So apparently all of his books, while not taking place on the same location, are all within this greater universe that is bound by similar laws. I know that the Cosmere includes the original Mistborn trilogy, Mistborn Era 2, Elantris, Warbreaker, and the Stormlight Archives, as well as a couple of short stories and things like that. But it's apparently this big sprawling world, and I'm very excited to dive into it, and this is going to be where I start. So that's all the Brandon Sanderson I have for this haul, but I do have another very popular fantasy series up next, which is the Gentleman Bastard series, which includes The Lies of Locke Lamora, Red Seas Under Red Skies, and The Republic of Thieves, all by Scott Lynch. So you notice there's kind of a theme in this haul of me picking up a lot of very well-beloved fantasy series and not necessarily knowing a lot of specifics about their plot. But The Lies of Locke Lamora, I know, is about a man named Locke Lamora, who is sort of the leader of this band of criminals and thieves known as the Gentleman Bastards. and I know it follows him and the friendship between Locke and Jean as they sort of engage in their criminal activities in this city as war threatens to change their way of life in the city. There is magic, but as far as I know, the main characters that we follow don't tend to use magic, so this is sort of more of a low magic urban setting. The thing I'm most excited for is that it sounds like Locke is going to be the lovable rogue type of character, which is my favorite character archetype. I am so weak for a lovable rogue. It's a problem. It seems like Locke is not necessarily going to be a good person. It says on the back that a lot of people consider him to be sort of like this Robin Hood type character, stealing from the rich and giving to the poor, and he resents this because why would he ever give his money away? So I'm very excited to read about this character. I think this is one I have the potential to really, really like, and I've also heard great things about the friendship dynamic developed between Locke and Jean, and I've heard that the character work is stellar in this, and I'm very excited. Now, I have heard that some of the writing can be a little bit jarring, and the way that the pacing goes in this can be a little disjointed, so I'm interested to see if that will like pull me out of it, or if I'm going to love these as much as I think I'm going to. Not quite as pretty, but they're good. So the next fantasy trilogy that I got this month was the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. The First Law trilogy includes The Blade Itself, Before They Are Hanged, and Last Argument of Kings. So the First Law trilogy and Joe Abercrombie in general I know is considered a very good place to start for grimdark fantasy. I know Joe Abercrombie has written a lot of books that are considered sort of the pinnacle of grimdark fantasy. Grimdark isn't something I am super familiar with. I've read several of these Song of Ice and Fire books, but that is about my entire experience with grimdark. I'm not opposed to sort of the grimdark themes, but I'm also a little cautious going into some of them. I've heard that this is a great series to read if you're starting out with grimdark, or even if you're an experienced veteran of the genre, but I've heard that this is an incredible grimdark fantasy series and one that is a must-read. And this one I know probably the least about the plot out of all of the ones here. All I know is that it follows a group of characters who are all morally gray, but morally gray to the point that most of them are just kind of bad people, but I know that Joe Abercrombie writes his characters in such a way that they are so complex and so nuanced, and they are very, very interesting to read about, and I am interested in getting more into sort of the grimdark fantasy genre, or at least finding out if that's something that I would really enjoy, so I figured this would be a great place to start. I also know that there are many more series and books that Joe Abercrombie has written in sort of the same realm, so if I end up really liking the First Law trilogy, there is a lot more for me to go out and read, which is exciting. You can tell this series is going to go well because of the amount of blood that is on the cover of the third one. So the next book that I physically have with me is actually not a complete fantasy trilogy this time, because it's not a finished fantasy trilogy, but the next one I have is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. So this book has been getting a lot of buzz lately, especially with the third book about to come out later this year. I thought this would be a very good time to pick up the first one and see what everyone's been talking about. So the Poppy War follows a character as she's going sort of into this military training academy and this sort of academy-like setting. And while she's at the academy, she finds out that she's one of the most talented students there, but she faces a fair amount of prejudice because she is a dark-skinned peasant from the South. So while I don't know a lot about the specifics of this book, I know that a lot of people have been talking about this and this book has been getting rave reviews. I also believe that The Poppy War was R.F. Kuang's debut and has gotten a lot of buzz and was sort of made a big splash. I know that this book sort of takes a very realistic look at the horrors of war, which is something that it's been sort of praised for a lot because a lot of fantasy tends to glorify war and violence, while war is the central theme of this rather than focusing on these great and glorious battles. A lot of it talks about like the horrors that war is for the everyday person, and I'm very excited to read this. I think this is going to be a really hard-hitting one, and if I end up enjoying this, I'm definitely going to pick up the second one and then hopefully the third one when it comes out later this year. So the last three books in this haul I don't actually physically have with me because they were shipped to my apartment, which is not where I'm staying currently, but I will have them in about 2 weeks when I'm back in my apartment, filming in front of my bookshelves. It'll be great. So the first one I have I pre-ordered back when it came out, which is A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor by Hank Green. I read An Absolutely Remarkable Thing right after it came out and I gave it 4 stars. I loved that book. I thought it was so interesting and very different than a lot of other things that I've read, so of course I pre-ordered A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor when it came out. So since it is the second book in the series, I'm obviously not going to describe what the plot of A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor is, but an absolutely remarkable thing follows a character named April May as she and her friends stumble upon this giant robot-looking sort of statue while they're walking home, and she decides to film it as she thinks it's an art piece that she stumbled across, and so she films it with her and her friend. As it turns out, a lot of these statues, which she called Carl, a lot of these Carls have been popping up all over the world, so her video actually ends up going viral. So this book ends up being a lot about sort of social media and how we present ourselves online, as well as like the political discourse around, are the Carls good? Are they bad? Are they statues? Are they aliens? No one really knows what's going on. It ends up being this story about how the social media shapes public discourse and how social media can be used sort of for good or evil, and it was a really interesting exploration of the social internet, and I enjoyed it a lot. And I know that the second one is going to sort of raise the stakes and change things a lot. I'm very excited to see where it goes from here, because where we left off was something. And then the final two books I have are the second and third books in the Farseer trilogy. The first one, Assassin's Apprentice, I read last month, and so the new ones I've gotten are Royal Assassin and Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. Again, since this is the second and third book in a trilogy, I'm not going to go into sort of the synopsis of those. The Farseer trilogy generally is about a boy named Fitz, who is the bastard son of Prince Chivalry. When the royal family finds out about Fitz, Chivalry ends up abdicating the throne and moving out to the countryside in shame, and he ends up being raised by the man who was Chivalry's houndmaster and right-hand man, and he sort of is raised around a lot of these court politics and these relatives who he's never known. Eventually, the king decides that they want to keep Fitz near, since he has enough royal lineage to potentially become a problem in the future. They want to sort of keep him on a tight leash, and they do that by training him to become the royal assassin. I loved the first book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and then immediately turned around and ordered the second two, so I'm really excited to jump into Royal Assassin. I will probably be doing that in August, and then finishing up Assassin's Quest in September. Can I get them all in frame? Ah, no. Alright, so that's all I've got for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're interested in following me on Goodreads, I'll have my link to my Goodreads in the description below, but other than that, I'll see you next time.